Hello and welcome to Pockenrop. In this week's video I am concluding my top 15 of the decade series. I've gone right back to the beginning to the 1950s. I've saved this till last because quite honestly it was probably the hardest one of them all to do, mainly because there weren't that many things really in contention. The album was very much in its infancy back then and I may have twisted the boundaries ever so slightly. As ever, I have used the PubMeeple ranking engine to create my list. I don't have a huge number of albums that would have been in the montage, so I'm not going to actually bother with one this time around. Just to say there's a few more Frank Sinatra albums, there's a few Ella Fitzgerald songbooks that might well have made it in. I did consider Kind of Blue by Miles Davis, but that really for me is predicated purely on that first opening track. So let's go straight in at number 15. And at number 15, I have placed the very first concept album. Came from 1955, and it's Frank Sinatra's In the Wee Small Hours. So there's 16 tracks on this album, and it is very moody. It is a collection of songs that are about the loss of love and sadness and depression. So things like Ill Wind, What Is This Thing Called Love, Glad to Be Unhappy, and probably the peach of the entire album, the title track, In the Wee Small Hours. It's not a happy listen, but it is a beautifully sung and beautifully arranged album that is worth checking out. Number 15, In the Wee Small Hours. At number 14, I have my sole entry on this list by someone who dominated the decade. It is, of course, Elvis Presley. And the album I've picked from here is from 1958. It's a 22-minute album. Now, just let that sink in. Most albums have 22 minutes as the maximum on a single side. This was the whole album, and it is King Creole. So it's a soundtrack from his, I think it's either his second or third film. It's the one after Jailhouse Rock, but I think it's a much better album, mainly because of two key tracks on this, which is Hard Headed Woman, which is a great song, and the title track, King Creole, which I think is one of his very, very best songs. My number 14, King Creole. At number 13, I have placed another album by Frank Sinatra. So Frank Sinatra was probably at the peak of his powers during the 50s. It's when he recorded his majority of his classic albums with Capitol Records. And this is no exception. It's Come Fly With Me from 1958. There were some great tracks on here like April in Paris and Around the World. But the real gem of the entire collection is the title track, which was written specifically for Sinatra by Kahn and Van Heusen, Come Fly With Me. It's a song everybody knows, and it's absolutely brilliant. To think it didn't exist before this collection is interesting, that it's such a touchstone of Sinatra's career. So number 13, Frank Sinatra, Come Fly With Me. Number 12, I'm going all the way back to 1952. Whether this was actually released as an album, I doubt. So very early 1950s, an album was actually exactly that. It was a collection of discs, whether those be 45 discs or 78 10-inch discs. And I don't know whether or not this was actually released as that, but it certainly exists as an album now and was recorded in 1952. It is the original soundtrack of Singing in the Rain. So this needs very little introduction. Gene Kelly, Donald O'Connor and Debbie Reynolds belting out classic songs, many of which were not written for Singing in the Rain. So the title track wasn't done by Gene Kelly. Moses Supposes wasn't. But there was one or two that were, including Donald O'Connor's Make 'Em Laugh, which is just fantastic. Singing in the Rain is a great musical film. in and of itself, but the soundtrack is really good, and it's my number 12. At number 11, I have placed an incredible musical achievement. From 1959, it is Ella Fitzgerald sings the George and Ira Gershwin songbook. Now, this was originally released as a 5 LP set, although it was done in separate volumes, because who could afford a 5 LP set in the 50s? It won Grammy Awards, and I've got here a vinyl copy of Volume 2 of that set. The George and Ira Gershwin songbook is genuinely incredible. Stuff like Lady Be Good, the Porgy and Bess, Summertime, Sweet Embraceable You, It Ain't Necessarily So, Love Is Here to Stay. These songs are amazing and always have been, but they are fantastic when they're done by Ella Fitzgerald. Ira Gershwin himself said that I never knew how good our songs were until I heard Ella Fitzgerald sing them. This is a stunning collection of peerless interpretations of timeless songs, and I'd urge anybody to check them out. This 3 CD set is ridiculously cheap. It is less than a tenner, I believe, and it's amazing. My number 11, Ella Fitzgerald sings the George and Ira Gershwin songbook. At number 10, I have placed an album that I think might well be stretching the bounds of what we could actually class as an album. From 1953, it's Calamity Jane. So this is just a 20-minute long album. It was a 10-inch when it was released in the UK of just 8 songs, all of which are from the film Calamity Jane. I believe my dad actually bought this as individual discs when it came out. So it would have been 45s or 78 10-inch discs. As I said, one of those kind of things that why we call an album was because there were collections of discs. So things like Deadwood Stage, the number 1 hit single, Secret Love, Harry, I'm Planning to Marry, and A Woman's Touch, and they're just fantastic songs. Windy City. It's a great collection of 8 songs, only 8, but each one of them is perfect. My number 10, Calamity Jane. At number 9, I have placed After Midnight from 1957 by Nat King Cole and his trio. Now, whilst later albums have things like When I Fall in Love and Unforgettable, this album stands separate from that because it actually feels like the real Nat King Cole. Those later albums, whilst they're by no means bad, they're really, really good. They are draped in strings. They feel like Nat King Cole, the crooner. This is Nat King Cole, the musician and jazzman, along with his trio. On this album is It's Only a Paper Moon, which I first heard as a kid in my parents' car, and I've loved ever since. I love the lyrics on Paper Moon. Sweet Lorraine, Duke Ellington's Caravan, and right at the end of it is a version of Route 66, which is so much better known as the Chuck Berry rock and roll version. But this song was originally written in 1946. So Route 66 caps this album off. It's a really, really fine album. And my number 9. At number 8, I have placed the only genuine jazz album on my list. Now, I've had a fair bit of Ella Fitzgerald or Frank Sinatra, things that could be branded under jazz because they were actually swing, but this is a proper jazz album. It is 1959's Time Out by Dave Brubeck. It is Time Out from 1959 by the Dave Brubeck Quartet. Best known for the track Take 5, a song done in 5/4 time. Now that in and of itself is unusual, but the whole album is music in unusual time signatures. So there's things like Blue Rondo a la Turk and Kathy's Waltz and Three to Get Ready. And the whole point is they did not use common time 4/4 at any point on this album. And they created a jazz masterpiece and a jazz bestseller that kind of took them by surprise. They were just mucking about, but what they ended up with is something that is a touchstone of modern jazz. Number 8, Time Out by the Dave Brubeck Quartet. At number 7, I have placed an album that routinely appears in top hundreds and top 200 albums of all time. It's by this gentleman here. It is The Chirping Crickets by The Crickets, which was actually Buddy Holly and the Crickets, from 1957. And it's hard to overstress the importance of this album in rock and roll history. But you have That'll Be the Day, a #1 smash single. Oh Boy, Not Fade Away, and of course Maybe Baby. 4 killer tracks. The fact that those 4 tracks kind of overshadow the rest of the album to a degree is possibly why it's not a little bit higher. We may yet come back to revisit Buddy Holly as we get a little higher in my list, but at number 7, 1957's The Chirping Crickets. At number 6, she's back again, and it's the very first of her songbook series. Ella Fitzgerald sings the Cole Porter songbook. This is phenomenal. It is one of my all-time favourite double albums. So when I get round to doing my double albums video at some point, you can expect to see this come up. First album that was ever released on the Verve Records label that was set up by Norman Granz, and it contains the definitive versions of so many Cole Porter songs. If I can just pick out a few highlights from this, I would suggest things like Anything Goes, Let's Fall in Love, I Get a Kick Out of You, I've Got You Under My Skin, Miss Otis Regrets, Don't Fence Me In. It's just every time we say goodbye, I nearly forgot that. These are definitive versions of the great songs that Cole Porter wrote. My number 6, Ella Fitzgerald sings the Cole Porter songbook. Into my top 5, and the 1950s is where this man started. He has appeared in several of my videos already. He had a phenomenal career. This is his second album. It is the fabulous Johnny Cash. This is an album that contains Don't Take Your Guns to Town, Supper Time, Frankie's Man Johnny, and I Still Miss Someone. It's an absolutely great second album from 1958. It isn't my favourite Johnny Cash album. That's probably San Quentin from the 60s. And it isn't actually my favourite Johnny Cash album from the 1950s. So I'll just say the fabulous Johnny Cash at number 5, he will appear again. And at number 4, I said we'd revisit. This time we are revisiting Buddy Holly, and it is the album Buddy Holly from 1958. Wow. Just wow. How can you not love an album that amongst its 12 tracks contains the following: Peggy Sue, Rave On, Words of Love, You're So Square Baby I Don't Care, Every Day, Valley of Tears, Listen to Me, and I'm Gonna Love You Too. 8 phenomenal songs. And then there's an additional 4 tracks around it as well, which again, they're overshadowed. But those 8 tracks alone make this album, it's classed as Buddy Holly's debut because that was his under his own name, but it features the Crickets. It's effectively, again, Buddy Holly and the Crickets. It's his second album, really, but it's so good. Number 4, Buddy Holly. At number 3, I've got a Broadway soundtrack album. and it is West Side Story by Bernstein and Sondheim. Now, I do agree. I think the 1960 film soundtrack is better, just mainly because of the vocals from Marnie Nixon. But this is the original recordings that were made of these 100% timeless songs. America, Tonight, Maria, I Feel Pretty, Somewhere, and my personal favourite, G Officer Krupke. Every musical needs a quirky song at some point, and G Officer Krupke provides it. It's so close to kind of breaking the rules in terms of lyrical construction and humor and almost swearing. It's so good, G Officer Krupke. An absolute great song. That alone would possibly have got West Side Story into this list, but as I've mentioned, America, Tonight, etc., the whole soundtrack is great. Number 3, West Side Story. And at number 2, it's that man again, the Man in Black, but at this time it's his Hot and Blue Guitar by Johnny Cash from 1957. This was Johnny Cash's debut, and it's a really special record. Tracks like Cry, 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 Wreck of the Old 97, which he made his own, Rock Island Line, and then 2 very important tracks, Folsom Prison Blues. Now that kind of soundtracked one track of his life where he had an interest in crime and punishment and the prison concerts that he did throughout his life. And then his signature song, I Walk the Line. Hot and Blue Guitar is a amazingly good album. Really, really good. If you're at all interested in country music, and I wouldn't even, I wouldn't even call it country music. It's better than that description would have you believe. It's Johnny Cash music. Hot and Blue Guitar, my number 2. Given how much I like that, what could I have possibly placed above it as my 1950s number 1? Well, it's that other man again, Frank Sinatra, and it's the songs, The Swingin' Lovers. I grew up with this album. My mum had it. 15 tracks. They are all, in contrast to In the Wee Small Hours, they're all songs that are upbeat about love. You Make Me Feel So Young, Too Marvelous for Words, Love Is Here to Stay, the Gershwin song, Pennies from Heaven, Making Whoopee, Anything Goes, the Cole Porter song, How About You. It's I've Got You in the mind. It's just, like I say, I grew up with this album and I still love it. I absolutely love it. I believe I've got my mum's vinyl copy in the loft somewhere. I really ought to get it out and listen to the vinyl version as opposed to my CD. But it's my number 1 from the 1950s. It was the first ever UK album chart number 1 from 1956. So it's a genuine landmark. Songs for Swingin' Lovers by Frank Sinatra is my number 1 from the 1950s. So that concludes my top 15 of the 1950s. I'd love to know what you thought of it and what you might never have heard. Is there stuff on here that you've not heard that you think you might go back and listen to based on this video? That would be fantastic. Or what have I not put in there that I perhaps should have done? Maybe I haven't heard it. Educate me in the comments below. So hit the thumbs up to like the video. It means that it's more likely to appear on other people's Google searches. Subscribe if you haven't already. And if you have already, why not get a friend's YouTube account and subscribe me onto their account, whether or not they know about it. And hit the bell to receive notifications. I'm putting something out weekly. Now that I've reached the end of my decade top 15 albums, then I'm not going to be putting one out in August. So might need some ideas. Why not drop me a message in the Facebook group or in the comments below. But until next time, thanks very much for watching.